Hello, my name is Stephen Hinkle. I'm a disability rights advocate and I'm a PhD student at Chapman University. I am very, very concerned about the direction our country is taking today. We have known since the civil rights movement that, over the itch there, we've known since the civil rights movement the struggles that oppressed people have faced in America, um, including people of color, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, people who are transgender or non-binary, people who are of low socioeconomic status. And since the civil rights movement, we have had a lot more diversity, equity, and inclusion in America in terms of access to school, access to housing, access to medical care, access to equal hiring in our workforce, and so forth, and the laws that protect us until 2025, when Donald Trump, in his orders of attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion and eliminating it in the federal government and taking down things like about the disability rights laws and putting his workers that deal with civil rights on administrative leave. This goes against what our country is for. We have known since the famous court cases like Brown versus Board of Education and Halderman versus Pennhurst and Mills versus Board of Education and Arc of Pennsylvania versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that have been the founding of access to education in our country. All of this is at risk right now simply because a president is acting like a dictator and a fascist. Uh, I challenge everybody to research history before the books get purged. As school systems around the country are getting pressure from groups like Moms for Liberty to ban books when they should be promoting literacy. That's happening in Florida, Idaho, and all over many other parts of the country, Oklahoma. The GOP right now and the Trump are trying to convert all education into religious education under a regime of Christian nationalism. But they don't realize that our country is a diverse country, and there are people in this country who are Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, Thou, Sikh, and a whole bunch of others. And putting a Bible in public schools is wrong in the sense that it be forced on people against some of their values if they're not a Christian. We um the whole disability rights thing is at risk if they overturn like IDEA and ADA and some of those laws. Luckily, they're still on the books, but Trump is, and Elon Musk and some of the others are trying to undermine this. Think about going back to the March in Washington years ago when people like Dr. Martin Luther King had to advocate and get arrested 30 times in the long road to justice. We need to work to preserve our rights now more than ever and not let Trump administration and Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation and other groups take them away for generations to come. This, what they're doing is an act of disgrace, to say the least, and is an act of oppression, to say the least. And there are a lot of things that people can do to help preserve their rights. The first thing is support businesses, schools, universities, and nonprofits that really advocate for those civil rights. Groups like ACLU, NAACP, Disability Voices United, TASH, Americans for Separation of Church and State, Electronic Frontier Foundation, and many, many others, and Southern Poverty Law Center, and many, many others groups out there that are doing that real advocacy work. The next thing you can do is when companies are trying to destroy or scale back their DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, write to those companies and explain what it means to you. And explain that and you can actually vote with your dollars by not supporting companies that are scaling back this or following for the white nationalism movement. Look at who their CEOs are giving campaign dollars to, and if they're giving them to the extremists or Trump or things like that, don't support them. Buy from other people. That way, you can do this. And if you see groups trying to ban books in schools, show up at those school board meetings and express your support of people having the rights to read. Some of the topics that are being banned include censoring of Black history, race theory, racism, education about it, the history of it, and sexuality education, and things from LGBTQ rights and diversity. And these kinds of things are important for kids to learn about in the next generation. I find it very sad that schools are supposed to be in the business of literacy, and yet they're being forced on the censorship. And you can fight that by going to there and advocating for diversity in their reading. The next thing you can do is study your history and all the oppression and start what had happened over the years and say to your congressman, you know, that you oppose a movement toward this again. And the way it can be, and the more letters that come out and the more negative press they get over doing this oppression and scaling back civil rights, the more negative press they get for it. And they realized that as people band together and not vote for some of these people next time, and that they realized the public supports civil rights, um, that way, when they more speak out about this, they'll realize that what they're doing is wrong and that change can be made. Try to get measures on your state ballot that cement the civil rights and strengthen them and get campaigns to pass them. I challenge all of you, and if you think about, I also think that people need to understand that you can also write to groups like the Heritage Foundation and express that this white nationalism and the harms it's causing and try to pressure them not to do this anymore. And really, and to all the Republicans and GOP, you need to study your history because if you look, Abraham Lincoln, who originally founded your party, abolished slavery. You look at George H.W. Bush was the signer of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You need to look that some of the people in your party have supported these rights, civil rights. And that this is not all that's happening. They're trying to roll back regulation, environmental protection. Um, the fact that they pulled out of the World Health Organization is also telling. Public health is being, and I understand the need to save our government money, but cutting taxes for the wealthiest, when the wealthiest already have a very comfortable life, the you need to instead cut taxes for the poorest of people. They're the people who are struggling to make ends meet. You look at the homeless like you see in Grants Pass, Oregon. You see in San Diego, Oakland, Baltimore, all these cities. And you know the big problem is that you've priced them out of the housing by letting the developers build ultra luxury without accommodating housing for your poorest. And 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 if the companies started paying their fair share of taxes, and so did the richer people, we could generate significant revenue to start paying down our national debt while still being able, and if you did a little bit higher taxes, we could even provide health, universal health care for our people for rates probably cheaper than private insurance. And if you look at, I know a lot of people think, oh, private healthcare is, or universal healthcare is socialist. But if you look, how many capitalist countries have universal healthcare? It is pretty telling. If you look at Canada, you look at Japan, you look at most of the countries in Europe, You look at some of the Scandinavian countries that have some of the best health care in the world. It's universal, and people can go to the hospital without breaking the bank. And yet, these countries are capitalist. The next thing to realize is that we need to let is that America is a diverse nation. We have many different religions. We have many different races. We have many different cultures. We have people with disabilities. We have many different gender identities. We have many different sexual orientations. Yet we all live together and we all deserve dignity, respect, and inclusion. And 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 to be able to go through our system without oppression like they did in the era of Jim Crow. It's so sad that this country, and that is what is at risk with these rollbacks, is if this keeps up, are we going to go back to the era of Jim Crow and sundown towns and racial segregation in schools and sending people with disabilities back to institutions when they really can give a lot of benefit to our society? When you keep rolling back DEI, that is what is at risk of happening. And that is why we need to do this. If you think about the civil rights movement from when Dr. King did his speech at the March in Washington, you think about the tour that went across Selma, Alabama in the movement. You think about how the Montgomery bus boycott and how buses were even segregated. It's to, if you ever seen the movie 42, how they used to segregate people with stadiums just because they were different color. And it's so sad that we used to send them to the worst occupations in society. We need to stop this discrimination movement so that does not happen to the next generation. When it comes to people with disabilities, they are even more at risk. According to one of the congressmen, they told me that they're gonna, the Trump administration wants to cut disability services to pay for the tax cut for the wealthiest. And that is morally wrong because so many people with disabilities require additional supports, whether it be assistive technology, whether it be accessibility ramps, whether it be wheelchairs, whether it be communication systems, whether it be supported living services, whether it be special ed services in school, um, and the IP program, and other things that help people with disabilities live a quality life in the community. If some of you forget, years ago, we were used to send them off to insane asylums and institutions in which they were subject to horrible living conditions. Let's not let that happen again, because when you look at how bad those places were, it was awful that they were locked away for life. And if you look, some of the best inventors all had disabilities. So that we really can contribute to society. Same with people of color. You look at our space program and how they did the math to bring John Glenn home. You look at um, the other thing that really thing is these deportations. The claim that Trump said this would bring would be cheaper food prices. What he didn't mention is the bird flu epidemic among agriculture, especially among chickens and cows, is already what part of why the food prices are high. And yet, the health secretary, RFK, pulled us out of the World Health Organization and has a poor record of pandemic response. The and very controversial views on vaccines and other things. And you look at other things like our food system, a lot of immigrants, one of the occupations that they were in was agriculture. And with all the deportations, who's going to take those positions to grow us our daily bread and to grow us our vegetables and our fruits and be able to work the fields to have enough workers, especially when the average age of a farmer was close to retirement age. Donald Trump, this your policies are really awful to say the least. And we need to let freedom ring from all across the country, from from the from where our country was founded up in Boston, Northern, and the former colonies, New England, um, across the plains of over to Chicago, where we big city, to cross our plains of Kansas and Missouri, across the Rocky Mountains of Colorado and Utah, up to the up to the far up to the northwest through North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, Montana, across the Pacific coast from Washington down to California, um, through our through our culturally rich places of Arizona, New Mexico, which have a big Native American heritage, through um, through our cattle yards and our stockyards of Texas, through America's heartland of Oklahoma, through across Alabama, the deep South, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, down through Florida and Georgia and South Carolina, past the Rookwood Field of Alabama and the Field of Dreams in Iowa. We need to let our freedom ring through our Carolinas and through our history of Virginia and Maryland, through our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and even out through the tundras of Alaska and the islands of Hawaii. We need to let freedom ring and diversity ring across this nation. We need to advocate and advocate. I need all of our lawyers to lawyer up and challenge these discriminatory agendas. I need, we need to, on a local level, educate people, including companies, colleges, universities, schools, libraries, and community centers that discrimination is wrong and censorship of history is wrong, and that, and that Black Lives Matter, transgender lives matter, LGBTQ lives matter, um, people of Native Americans matter, lives of Native Americans matter, lives of people with disabilities matter, ethnic community lives matter, lives of low socioeconomic status matter. And we need to give people opportunities that they can go out and since we've known since the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement and the disability rights movement, we can tackle this to the ground if everybody bands together and shows them that this is wrong and that we start educating people of older generation to realize how the things have changed and that we are no longer an old boys network and we fix the inequalities in our system to the level that freedom can ring throughout and that diversity can ring throughout our country. We need to, and to me, it's not a blue versus red issue. It's an issue in which everybody needs to be well respected. And even in our faith based communities, as the Pope Francis once did, of bringing his church into the modern era, if you notice, religion is on a decline and thing, and not everybody, and I agree that some people don't want to participate in it, but one of the studies that was really interesting I read is what is the younger generation, what's tuning them out is discrimination. And it's maybe time for some of those communities to adapt and welcome members who might be a different gender identity or different sexual orientation or a different culture or different race. It's time for our country to to adopt policies and really, as they once say, who's best fit for the job was one of the comments that people were saying to abolish diversity and inclusion. I've got a different take, and that is to reform our transition system to really be able so the workforce can take advantage of anyone's talents in the way that it can be best used, in the sense that by treating everybody with dignity, respect, and no discrimination in hiring, and to really look at one's talents, one's gifts, one's assets, one's abilities, and their passions, and seeing where the workforce can use those skills. And that approach can actually benefit people with disabilities because a lot of them have some talent. And if all we have to do is find a way to unlock it instead of sending them to the poorest occupations of society. If you look today, there's a lot of people with disabilities today who are doing higher wage work, including as CEOs of companies, as as code breakers. As one of my um uh, family-in-law on the other side of my brother's wife's family told me that some of the best programmers were autistic. And if you look, there are others involved in graphics to code breaking to counselors to doctors to engineers who have disabilities. And the workforce can do the same with people of color, people of different races, and really adapt to putting the talents if they adopted non discriminatory hiring. And I challenge all of you to read Donald Trump and others to realize that diversity and inclusion and non discrimination are can be an asset to the employers. And talking about greed, the United States right now has a pay gap between CEOs and minimum wage workers or lowest paid worker within a company of about 451 to 1. That is atrocious when you look at Australia, which is only 50 to 1, and Japan, which is only 11 to 1 gap. And that is, and that, and if you look, those rich people already have a good quality of life. It is our poorest who can't afford housing that are being priced out that is the problem. And if employers started paying everybody a livable wage, they would see a really good thing and change in their morale of their workforce. And we can also slow down the deportations too. I encourage cities to to not do more than they're legally mandated to do in terms of their local police, in terms of schools, in terms of colleges, in terms of other entities, and let the CBP handle it all. And I really want to commend Mexico for not admitting a deported plane into their thing. I encourage more countries of the world to do this, and instead for Donald Trump and his crew to offer our dreamers a path to citizenship and to let some of the people at the border who are applying for to have a chance to each have a hearing of what the reason is they came to the United States. Yes, criminals and drug dealers should not be let in, but those escaping a very bad situation in their home country should have a fair shot at temporary asylum in the USA. And I think that that those that have lived in the US came over when they were little and have been in the US most of their lives and have not committed any crimes here should have a path to citizenship. And I encourage all of you to start making change in society and to write letters to your congressman expressing that what they're doing is wrong and to stand up and band together, organize marches, organize protests, um, um, join some of the organizations trying to fight this regime, and tell them, tell, speak out at conferences and events, um, and let's stop these fascist dic and populist dictator Donald Trump and his crew from taking over our country using tactics like Nazi Germany, and instead build a nation in which everyone has liberty and justice for all, and be able to have a nation in which they can go from birth till they're a senior citizen without facing oppression for who they are. Thank you.